We're back with David Redman, retired Canadian Army Lieutenant Colonel, head of the Emergency Management Agency in Alberta in the early 2000s, and an expert in emergency management, provincially, nationally, and internationally, until 2013, when he fully retired. You tried to advise and help the premiers on how to respond to COVID-19. Can you maybe share with our audience what the response was?
Absolutely. So I waited because I realized in March of 2020 that the premiers were it was their first experience with anything like this, and that they had responsible people in all of their governments that would try and lead them back away from the dangerous approach that they took, which at the time we called lockdowns. And so I waited until April the 9th, in fact, when I started to write and try and call and get in contact with all 13 premiers. So 13 out of 13 for 12 months. Each month I tried a different approach. I wrote them, I tried different ideas. I tried to get them just to talk to me. I wasn't looking for a job. I wanted to be retired, but I wanted them to stop the deadly use of non-pharmaceutical interventions. I was ignored. Completely ignored. I know they received all of my correspondence because there was freedom of information requests to a number of the premier's offices, which showed that they had received everything. So it was clear that they were intent on proceeding with the use of the lockdown methodology, which had never been used before. And so maybe just to talk about lockdowns for a second. Lockdowns are a term that's been fabricated and made up, but what it is it's the use of non-pharmaceutical interventions. Now, pharmaceutical interventions are things like treatments and ultimately vaccines, but we can talk about them later. Non-pharmaceutical interventions, there's 15 of them. They had been studied for decades. And it was known that non-pharmaceutical interventions, things like closure of business, closure of schools, contact tracing, wearing of masks, all 15 of them were documented, reviewed, and peer-reviewed studies done on them. And it was known that they had very little effect on transmission and deaths, but they had massive effects on the welfare, the mental health, and the welfare of the economy and of citizens. And so in all of the pre-written plans, it was strongly recommended that they never be used because of their deadly outcomes.
And I think
so at the end of that whole process, I wrote a paper in 2021 on Canada Day on Canada's deadly response to COVID-19 to hold the elected officials and MOH ultimately accountable.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. I know so many small business owners who really were devastated by COVID. How is it that churches were shut down, small businesses were shut down, but Home Depots, the large big box stores were allowed to operate? Was the virus that intelligent that it knew where it was going?
Absolutely not.
So moving forward, how can a business protect itself? We can certainly expect this to happen again sometime in the future, hopefully not in our lifetimes, but let's say it does. What does a business do?
Well, I think businesses have to respond with all other Canadians and demand that there be a national inquiry into the response to COVID-19 at the provincial territorial level and at the federal level, and that they must hold to account the people that did this deadly response, because only in that way can we break the mass formation that has happened to our Canadian public and all our citizens, where they believe that locking themselves in their houses, closing businesses, and doing the terrible things that we did for 3 years should ever happen again. We've got to make them realize they never should have been done in the first place, and that we will never do them again.
Was a bit of that in the Ingram trial in Alberta, where Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's now being appointed by President Trump to head NIH, where he testified, and I think you spoke to him and met him there?
Absolutely. If you look at the Ingram trial, and if you look at the trial that was held in Manitoba, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya testified at both. In fact, he's extremely well versed in the Canadian response and what was done wrong. But even more importantly, if you go back in time to the fall of 2020, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, along with Dr. Kuldorf and Gupta,
Hold that
wrote
thought, and let's pick it up right after the break.